What's that? I think so, yes. Do a roll call?
Okay. Roll call for Board Member Dean,
Here.
Board Member Driscoll, Board Member Mishler,
Here.
Board Member Powers,
Here.
Board Member Simons,
Present.
Chair Al Fattal.
So Ken, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Buddy, please stand, face the flag, hand over heart, ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, welcome everyone to your boardroom. This is the Consolidated Oversight Board meeting. Our chair is not here, so I'm your vice, so I will be leading today's meeting. Let's start with the approving of the minutes. Item 4. Can I get a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
And that passes. Agenda review. Anyone have any changes? There's only 2 items or of note. Nothing to change on the agenda, I assume. Get a motion, please.
Move to accept the agenda.
Second.
I'll vote. We're moving quick, Jessica, sorry. Any board comments? Please.
Yes, I just want to say that this last meeting, of course, that I was out of town with family affair business and stuff. And I have watched the video of the meeting, so I'm up to speed on what was going on and everything. And I appreciate what the board was doing. And I was also frustrated when we went through the process back in January, like some other members mentioned, where we would ask questions and we didn't have any answers, but then we were forced to blindly approve documents without having all the information. So I'm glad we're moving forward into ahead of time with more detail, so we have time to do all that and process all the stuff. Thank you.
I'll comment. This is kind of an opportunity. This is the first time this is a new oversight board. We've had 9, 10, obviously 11 separate agencies running independently. And this is one of the this is the first time that we're really getting our arms around what our role is, what our responsibilities are, and it's a learning process. So we came out of the gate, we got these rocks dropped in our laps, like, what is all this? And some of us were already on board, so I get that. But this is an opportunity for us to look at 2 of the more important items. One is the winding down efforts of the properties, and 2 is the costs associated with the administrative costs in reaction to what we're seeing from the Department of Finance. So this is an important meeting, and we are looking probably to another meeting in October. If this goes well, we may not, but we'll see how it goes. Those are my comments. Okay.
The only I want to add is that we're designing the path here. Where our objective is to take on the obligations and responsibilities that we have a fiduciary for the state of California via the county. So none of this is personal for any city. What we have to do is just get everything on point so we can focus on the issues and have the system for where we can take care of the usual day-to-day work as well.
Mr. Powers, I would support that. Our objective is to wind down. That was what we're here about, and I felt in the past somewhat frustrated that we're not headed in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Any public comments at this time? Okay. Let's go to item 8 on the agenda. This is regarding the winding down efforts. And we've asked some of the cities, the first 3 that were on the list, to come report to this board on their efforts regarding winding down. So let's begin with, we'll start with the city of Fillmore, if they're present. to provide us a presentation, if that's all right.
Good morning, Board. My name's Galen Bryan. I'm with the City of Fillmore. I'm the Finance Director. I'll be giving the presentation today. So let me just see, I have to see how it works. Okay. Okay, that doesn't work. Okay. In summary, the City of Fillmore designated, 12 properties were designated in the property management plan as redevelopment properties. Out of those 12 properties, 9 were designated as governmental, those transferred over to the city, and 3 were designated to sell. Here's a summary of the 12 identified properties that we had. I'll be focusing on the bottom 3, which is 10, 11, and 12, which are the designated to sell properties.
So can I ask you, the first 9 have been already addressed, and you're focused on the last 3?
Pardon, 1 through 9?
Yeah.
Yes, those have already been addressed and completed. Those transferred over to the city.
And that was done like before this
Yes,
committee was formed?
yes, that was done prior to this meeting. That's all complete. Yes. This is a visual of the 9 properties that were designated governmental and transferred over, and those are all complete. And then we had 3 designated to sell. This one is the town theater site. And these 2 are the other 2 sites, which is the railroad property and the vacant lot. I'll talk about those. So first, here's the 3 designated to sell. So the railroad property, site number 11, is 0.66 acres on Mountain View and Santa Clara Street. That's where it's located, the lot. It's a vacant lot. And then we have another property site, which we call the vacant lot, site number 12, 0.36 acres, located on 510 Santa Clara Street. And the historical town theater, which is site number 10, 0.14 acres on Soquel Central Avenue at 338 Central Avenue. First up, the railroad property, site number 11. The status of that property, it's appraised at $330,000. It's an approved development project for the city. The development project status will be to build 16 townhome units. They'll be owner occupied. The application and plans have been submitted. They are under review but not yet approved. The development agreement, our city attorney is working on development agreement. It's in progress. Probably over the next couple of months, it'll be complete. And that will contain the timing of the purchase of the property, the timing of when the property will transfer over and be sold by the property developer. It will contain that timing, and it would be based on the property being developed per the approved plans. The city wants to ensure that when we sell the property, it gets developed. They don't want the property to be sold and left vacant for several years. They want to ensure it's a development project for the city. I have estimated sales date January 2021. That's probably the worst scenario date. Our city attorney gave me some estimates yesterday, and it could be November of 2020. So that's probably the worst case scenario it will sell, because we have to go through the development process. The plans have to be approved. They have to actually start construction on the site.
Yeah, and in respect to this particular property, are there any zoning approvals that are required for this development?
Yes.
So there's a process for doing that as well as part of the development agreement?
I think it was zoned it was zoned.
It's already been zoned?
Already zoned
So
for
it's already been
development
zoned.
of the property.
Was there a survey done on the property?
I believe there was a survey done.
Was there any environmental done on the property?
The environmental will be done. I'm not sure on the status of the environmental, but that will be done along with the property being developed.
And was there any soil tests on the property? The reason I'm asking is you have an appraisal, so the appraisal should, if you, for instance, some cities have liquefaction. I don't know if you guys have it up there. It would affect the value of the appraisal and would delay things. That's why I'm asking. Have you done any of that work as a city?
I'm not sure on that, but I believe that was done because this property is, the plans are already under review and submitted, and so I would believe that would have to be done.
Okay, thank you.
I can verify that, so soil,
Thank you.
environmental, okay. And here's the site of the railroad property vacant lot. And there's been a lot of discussion about this property with the plans. Here's a visual of the plans for that property. So we've got the visual that we've been reviewing. It's been under review.
Is this from a developer?
Yeah, the developer. This is the proposed townhome units that would be developed on that site and built.
And again, is this, I'm asking these questions because there's a process for getting a property ready for sale. So I just want to make sure where you are at with the path.
I believe
for ready
it's
for
ready to sell. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, now moving on to the vacant lot, which is site number 12. This one's located at 510 Santa Clara Street, appraised at $200,000, and it's also approved development project. And it's very similar to the railroad property. It's, this one is a little bit larger, 24 townhome units. This will be renter occupied. All the application plans submitted, under review, but they're not yet approved, and the development agreement will contain the timing of the property. Estimated sales date is June 2021, and could be sooner than that. That's the latest date. And again, a picture of the site and a picture of the property development. The lower left is the front view, and the lower right is a back view. And then now the final property, Historical Town Theater, site number 10. It's acquired in 1994 for $75,000. In 1996, we spent $992,000 to rehabilitate it. 6,200 square feet, theater building, seats 200 people. It's located at Central Avenue downtown. However, that building was closed in 2012 due to health and safety issues. And it's only been open sporadically since that time, here and there, for like Santa Claus or a special theater at Christmas time, special movie at Christmas time. It's estimated to cost $200,000. That's probably in the low end in improvements to reopen it. And then there's a picture of it, site number 10. The status of that, appraised at $380,000. We issued an RFP on August 29, 2019. To request offers to purchase the town theater. September 11th, we had proposers conference and a walkthrough, and 3 potential buyers showed up for that. Today they are due. Those proposals are due by 3 p.m. today. And preference will be given to proposers willing to keep the town theater as a performing arts venue. That's the hope of the city. But the city also realizes that may not be possible. That's our goal. And expected sales date possibly March of 2020, and that is if we get a proposal to purchase, to sell that theater, to buy it. And that's.
Sorry, could you go back? How much was the value of this?
It was, let me see, $380,000.
Are you prepared if you get a bid under 380 to accept?
I think we want the $380,000, but I'm not sure that has to be $380,000, but it could be something that we look at, because we want to make sure it stays as a theater venue for the city too at the same time.
So that, there's 2 things happening here. One, it's the historical side, is that correct?
Yes.
By the state or federal guidelines?
You know what? I don't believe it was federal designated as historical.
So you don't know if it's a designated state or federal site?
I don't believe so. I think the city calls it a historical town theater, but I don't believe it actually received that designation.
So there's no tax benefits for the ownership of it under a historical site?
Oh, I see. Yeah, they would have to go through the process. Maybe it could be designated as historical town theater. I'm not sure the age of it, actually. We purchased it.
And did the appraisal include the fact that it needs $200,000 renovation?
Yes, it did, yeah. It's a big theater.
Okay. I mean, wouldn't bother me to start looking at some of these appraisals if you want, just want to take a look at them on the ones that are not under contract or under development agreement. Throwing that out there.
I can forward the appraisals, or, if that's your,
Again, I'm looking at it from a path of getting ready for sale. If the appraisals are off and you're spending money and time doing something that's overvalued, as an example, we may want to push you to sell it for less money or something like that because it's not being realistic if you want to move the property. So I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility.
I think they're at the point now they're receiving bids today. So I think we'll know more in the following months of where you are with those bids.
yeah, on the town theater, yes. On the other two properties, I mean, we have developers already in the works.
Yeah, I'm not worried
agreement.
about those.
Okay.
You're deep into those.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and then, then there's another picture of our town theater. And that concludes my presentation.
Any questions? No? I'm sorry, I didn't get your name?
Galen Bryan.
Galen. Thank you for coming and presenting.
Okay, you're welcome.
Mr. Chair. So to kind of respond to Mike, there was, and maybe you can help us out here, prior to this coming to the Oversight Board, the cities had the option of qualifying certain properties for particular uses that were approved, government uses. So do you want to kind of quickly go over that? So
They would go to the Department of Finance, well, their own oversight board, and then the Department of Finance for an approved plan. I don't know in Fillmore's case, you'd have to ask what stage those properties are.
they indicated they had 9 properties that were city properties.
Well, they would apparently approve for governmental use, but as to the other 3, I don't know. There's
I'm just saying for the governmental use side. So the ones that were taken off the board out of the 12 properties, there were 9 properties for government use, which is one of the allowable uses. I think housing was another one that's allowed. And then there's the properties that don't qualify for other, and that's the 3 remaining properties is what we're looking at here.
I guess my question would relate to those 9 properties that were taken off. Are all those expenses then outside of the admin cost, and those things are all borne by the city?
You need to address the question to the representative
Yeah.
from Fillmore.
Sorry, Galen, do you mind coming back? Sorry, I thought we were done with you.
I'm sorry. Yeah, my question is, you had the 9 properties that
Yes.
were transferred to the city for governmental use, like you said. My question to you is, are all the costs borne by that, operating those 9 sites and whatever you're doing with them, are all those costs outside of the admin cost?
Yes, those,
So those are all borne
they're all
completely by
now,
the city costs?
yes, they're off the books for the RDA, and they're on the
Okay, you're
city's
not-
books, and we maintain them and pay all the expenses to maintain those
Okay,
properties.
I just want to make sure there's no leakage going back and forth
No.
between those sites and the 3 other sites.
Yeah, no, there's
Okay, thank
there's nothing going.
No, go ahead. And that's a good question to ask all the participants. The 9 properties are under title, who's the title under? Is it the city?
They're now moved over to the city and under title to the city. Those
And
are
the
all,
3 properties that are remaining are under what title?
that would be under the former RDA title. They'd
Okay.
still be under,
So you made that distinction already.
yes, I checked, you can check the APN number. I have a list of APN numbers. I didn't present it, but I was able to check the APN numbers. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next is Moore Park.
Play with this for a second.
Good morning, Vice Chair, members of the board. I'm Jessica Sandifer, Community Services Manager for the City of Moore Park, responsible for management of the city properties. I'm pleased to present to you an update on our property disposition activities. I didn't bring the total number of government use properties like Fillmore did. I'm mostly just focusing on the properties that we're disposing, but we follow along with that line of questioning, we have transferred all of our government use properties, and all of those expenses are covered by the city. So of the properties remaining, we have five properties that are still held. 4 properties are funded by the RDA tax allocation bonds that the RDA had issued, and I'll get into that a little bit more at the end. 2 properties are encumbered by exclusive negotiating agreements, which will be abbreviated ENA in the rest of the presentation. 1 property has a potential development partner that is currently a tenant, and 2 properties have no potential development partners at this time. The first site is 347 Moore Park Avenue. It is a former gas station site, was purchased initially for road widening and redevelopment. The long-range property management plan designation was retained for economic development. Potential factors affecting the development and sale of the site are mostly the road widening reservation, which would be about 2,400 square feet of the 18,000 square foot lot. It does front a Caltrans right-of-way. The title is currently held by the city of Moore Park. And the current status is that we're seeking a development partner, and this is one of our bond-funded properties.
Can I ask you, have you done environmental on that property? Is it clean?
It was clean before we bought it. It was a gas station that got converted to an auto use facility, and then we
So
cleaned
the
up the auto
underground
use
tank was
facility.
removed and
Yeah.
remediated? Okay,
Yeah, and there's environmental health records on that.
thanks.
Our next property is 467 High Street. It was formerly a residential property in a commercial zone that we purchased for economic development. It's also retained for economic development on the long-range property management plan. There's no real factors affecting the development or sale of the site. It is a little bit on the small side to do a large project. But other than that, the title is currently held by the city of Moore Park. We do have a ENA on this property. It's in the very beginning stages of feeling out the project, but right now it's supposed to be a mixed-use residential commercial project. And the current status on that is it's assigned to a city council ad hoc committee for kind of developing what the project would be for the site. And this is also a bond-funded property. 192 High Street. If you've been to Moore Park, you've probably driven by it. If you've driven on High Street, it's the entire south side of High Street, basically with the big yellow grain building. So it's basically a formerly grain mill, and it's been multiple uses, restaurants and commercials over the years. It's a retained for economic development and government use. It's a 2.89 acre site, and on the long-range property management plan, the middle 2.14 acres of the site were retained for economic development, and the balance of the property was a government use property, primarily for downtown parking. And recently we recorded a parcel map to separate out the economic development parcels from the government use parcels.
I'm sorry, so what, your plan here is to subdivide the lot?
Yeah, we've subdivided the lot.
Oh, it's already been subdivided?
Yeah, 4 lots. 2 lots are for economic development.
And the 3 acres is the part for economic development? Or the entire?
2.14 is the economic development, and then the balance
Oh, I
is
see.
the 2.89, so terrible with math in my
No
head. Potential.
Sorry, do you have an appraisal on that, or is that about in the next slide?
That's on the next. This property is a little bit special, so I'll get there.
Yeah, it looks like it.
So the potential factors affecting this site, it is a narrow site. It's only about 100 feet wide, which makes it difficult to do most commercial developments and provide parking. We do fortunately have a railroad right-of-way that abuts the property, so we can take about 20 feet of that right-of-way. The problem is it's offered to users of it as a license agreement, which is not a fee ownership of the property and can provide issues for financing and stuff like that. It also has pretty significant liquefaction soil that requires mitigation before construction. The title on this property is held by the city of Moore Park. In 2016, we went to the Oversight Board and received approval from the Oversight Board for the city to purchase the property. We paid the tax collector, and the proceeds were distributed to the taxing entities. So this is basically a city property that we're still developing. It does have an ENA on it, and it currently is proposed to be 91 residential units and 13,000 square foot commercial. The project status is in environmental analysis stage for the overarching project, and that would take up those 2 economic development
You
parcels.
said it has 100 feet depth?
Yeah.
Okay.
So how long is that thing?
Or tall?
The project, it's going to be 3 stories.
3 stories.
Yeah, with all the parking in the back right now, currently. The next property is what we call Princeton Avenue. It's a vacant land. It's always been vacant. And as long as I've lived in Moore Park, it was vacant. So it also has the retained for economic development designation. It's 2 parcels that total 2.26 acres, but it's been affected heavily by erosion. The adjacent Arroyo Simi. So there's really only about 1.5 acres of usable area. So that's a potential factor you'd have to mitigate for that arroyo erosion. And in the past, when we've had a development project on the site, because it's an M1 use immediately adjacent to residential, there was significant opposition to that. So it could be a development factor. This is held by the successor agency. Excuse me. We're currently looking for a development partner, and this is also a bond-funded property. And last but not least, we have 500 Los Angeles Avenue. This is a former Caltrans maintenance yard that was purchased by the redevelopment agency. It's currently leased to an RV sales dealership. The designation was retained for economic development. It also has liquefaction soil that would have to be mitigated if a building were constructed. Titles held by the successor agency. We have been currently negotiating with the current tenant on the property sale, and this is a bond-funded property as well. And so going forward, our disposition plans are to hire a consultant. I am the full breadth of the property management company or department at the city, and so I just don't have time. So we're hiring a consultant to help us market and sell the properties, identify potential opportunities for future uses, and then partners that could develop those uses, with the goal to ensure that the properties are developed and not continue to be left vacant for land speculation purposes. And then a quick note on the tax exempt or the bond funded property status. The bonds are tax exempt bonds, and so the tax law requires that the property sale proceeds for those properties either go back to the bond fund for bond purposes or put in an escrow until the first call date on the bonds, which for these bonds is 2024 or 2026. So it affects all of those properties noted as bond funded properties. And that concludes my report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I guess my first question is, why has it taken, I guess, was there something going on in the background I'm not familiar with? Why has it taken so long to get to this point, to go out to sell? You see what I'm getting to?
Yeah.
I would think you would have figured this out and been further down the pipeline before.
Yeah,
You're
no,
talking
it's,
about doing something down the road here.
And
I thought you would have done this a year or 2 or 3 or 4 years ago.
well, it's something we've been working on since the properties have been purchased, and for various reasons, when we have identified development partners, it hasn't worked out. Almost all of those properties has had a development person, somebody looking at it for a development, but for whatever reason, it didn't work out, and then the downturn hit and nobody was buying property, especially commercial property, and developing it. And so I think we're finally coming out of that process. We also have some new leadership in Moore Park, and so we have just a different direction on kind of moving off and getting rid of the properties as quickly as we can, but also, like I said, putting them into a use that's, not just vacant land.
That's the one. I should be able to push the right button, but sometimes I can't. So I know on the, first of all, on the Princeton properties, isn't there some Caltrans development that's going to be coming up?
Not on that property. I mean, we have the road widening project that the city's going to be performing, and there is a little, I don't think they actually ended up needing that property for that, but not specific to Caltrans.
So it won't affect
No,
the
it's outside of the Caltrans right away for the freeway overpass, thankfully.
And then I know on the, you mentioned 2 properties, you've identified liquefaction.
Yeah.
Have you done liquefaction testing on any other properties?
Yes, we've done it on all of the properties, I think except their 347 Moore Park Avenue. but all of the properties have been tested, and the ones that showed up kind of in the level of mitigation, it was the LA Avenue property and then the High Street property.
And do you have appraisals on all those properties?
Not current appraisals. We have one current appraisal, but the rest of them are 2 to 3 years old, so we'd have to rerun them.
And when do you project getting those done?
Our council has advised that when we get appraisals, they stale date in 6 months. And from what I understand, you have to sell property at fair market value or trigger prevailing wage on any development projects that are coming
Right.
forward. So we're kind of using the appraisals we have and searches of property data that I have access to start negotiations. And then we get appraisals at the point where we're going to tie in a purchase and sale agreement.
But when you did the appraisals, was liquefaction considered in those appraisals?
In the ones that we knew about, yeah, but not, in the 2 that we know about, yeah, they have been.
But the other properties don't have liquefaction issues?
No,
Oh, good, okay.
yeah.
I'm sorry, so when were the appraisals done now? Are they old, you're
We
saying?
had,
They're out of date, kind of?
2 years ago, or 3 years ago now in 2016 for most of the properties. We do have 2 new ones on the LA Avenue property and the High Street property.
So as your plans going forward, at some point you plan to do a current one, because like you're saying, you want to wait.
Right,
until
because
you get-
I have to keep doing them every 6 months, and they're not,
Right.
they're not inexpensive.
Thank you.
Can I ask you, when would be a good time to get a report back on your progress? I mean, we'd like to see this again. I don't want to be too early. I don't want to wait too long here.
Yeah, like I said, we're going to get a consultant on board, and so that will probably happen at our November meeting. And then I would like to give them a couple of months to kind of evaluate everything and come up with a plan.
Maybe
and then
6
we can
months?
present the
Is that
plan. No,
acceptable?
yeah, I think,
Okay.
yeah.
The other question is, you mentioned marketing. Have you reached out to brokers in any way on these properties?
Not recently,
Ever?
no. Typically, it's just been, we've either issued RFPs or people have approached us.
So you rely on staff did all that work, I mean, in terms of the marketing and the outreach and trying to,
Right.
okay. Any other question? Thank you for your presentation. And last but not least is Oxnard. Definitely not least. We got a lot of property.
Okay. Morning, Vice Chair, members of the Oversight Board, Adam Smith, City of Oxnard. Good morning. Okay, I'm going to do just a quick intro, then I'm actually going to hand it off to my colleague. All right. So our long-range property management plan, the LRPMP, identified 51 properties that were owned by the former redevelopment agency. And of those 51, only 7 remain. 38 were transferred to the city as governmental use assets, and 5 were sold to the city, and 1 was sold to a private buyer. So of those 7, they're all along what we call the Meta Street district of our downtown, all vacant. And according to the LRPMP, all of these properties were acquired for the purpose of downtown revitalization. And what drives the city's strategy, we have a Meta Street master plan, which is kind of dated from 1990. We also have a downtown vision plan from 2016. And also just recently, within the past few weeks, we've had a new downtown code that was approved, which will drive the development of the area. There's actually 2 parcels on the bottom. The south end that we actually have a new upcoming project about. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Emilio Ramirez, who's our housing director, to talk about this new upcoming project.
How do I use this to advance? Use this to advance? Yeah, the middle one. Good morning, members of the Oversight Board. Emilio Ramirez, Housing Director for the City of Oxnard. Thank you for allowing this presentation. The update really on disposition or finishing the sale of the former redevelopment properties is that we are actively pursuing a plan for developing mixed use projects along those vacant lands. Mixed use, including housing and active retail in an area that is kind of downtown Oxnard. There's a challenge, and the challenge is that those sites are not contiguous, and they're small, odd-shaped parcels in and of themselves, and they need assembly in order to accomplish a fruitful development. In this case, the project site that you see on screen, the vacant piece of land is actually 3 parcels. One of them owned by the successor agency, the other a private property, and the last one by the city of Oxnard. Then intersected by an alley, and then a public parking lot owned by the city of Oxnard. So we are working on an idea to procure development of that consolidated parcel. It's going to mean assembly of the parcel by the city of Oxnard, including acquisition from the successor agency of the successor-owned site, which is the easternmost site of the vacant piece of land, and assembly of the private-owned site. I'm actually meeting with them tomorrow to try to get that going. But the idea is to, oh, I went the wrong way. Still going the wrong way. I don't know how to use it.
It's okay.
So they
Happened to me too.
yeah.
If it helps, I can pull this off.
Oh,
To advance, and if you need to go backwards.
thank you. It's the button that says forward. So the idea is to assemble all of these parcels into city-owned site. The city of Oxnard or my department, the housing department, may be making an offer to the successor agency in order to acquire the property in a way that is consistent with the Oxnard Long Range Property Management Plan. And that includes the development of affordable housing and job creation, economic development, and therefore within allowances that are stated within the Long Range Property Management Plan. We are seeking to assemble just over an acre worth of property to produce that mixed-use development. Primary goals over this disposition is to encourage production of mixed-use housing, affordable housing within them, permanent supportive housing within that affordable housing, and active retail along the ground floor. Maybe cultural amenities along the 7th Street site and active retail along the Oxnard Boulevard site. We do think that we can effectively bring forth all of the objectives of the Oxnard Long Range Property Management Plan, which is economic development and business recruitment for that district in downtown, as well as providing needed affordable housing and permanent supportive housing in our challenge to curb homelessness in the area. We're seeking to issue that RFP sometime within the next 90 days. That means that we're going to need to make an offer to the successor agency in order for the city to acquire the subject site from the successor and then incorporate it into that RFP. We're seeking to then contract with the identified developer buyer sometime winter of 2020 and achieve certificate of occupancy hopefully not later than 2024.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
can you go back to the parcel map?
I hope.
So which parcels are owned by the successor agency? Is it the green ones or the purple one? No, you're there.
We don't have a pointer.
So the two in green that are to easternmost of the map, or almost to the right.
Got it.
The right side of the site.
Okay, I'm assuming north is on the map.
Yes, I'm
Screen
sorry.
to the north.
North on the map is up, and so everything to the right side of the screen.
Right
on the
of
right
the
side of the
of the
screen.
purple parcel?
The purple parcel is private, and that's the site that we would try to acquire. The green parcel on the other side of the purple parcel is city-owned.
Okay, and if I'm understanding you, you will make an offer on on your 2 successor agency parcels to acquire it for the city during this RFP process, or?
Prior to issuing the RFP, we're going to try to assemble everything under city ownership, which includes the parking lot that's in green, that site directly across the street of the alley, and then the private, and then the successor property. So we'll try to assemble the private and successor into city ownership prior to issuing that RFP
Next 90 days.
within the next 90 days.
And have you already have your appraisals ready and your,
We have an old appraisal. We need to update it. Honestly, the conversation with the private property owner is going to drive really how we undertake this development. So we're going to meet with them tomorrow and hopefully try to assemble or make offers to both the private and to the successor agency at the same time.
okay, so if I'm just trying to understand it. I'm not challenging.
Sure.
So you want the developer in conjunction so you know what the plan is for when the acquisition dates are and what you're going to pay for them?
I don't necessarily need the developer to be in conjunction, but I need the private property owner to be on the same page as the successor agency, in as much as the private, the one in pink, is in the way of developing the first site if we're going to acquire the successor agency site. So if we're not able to acquire the private property, then we'll have to rethink the concept for the successor site.
And you may know that in the next 120 days.
I hope to, yes. Like I said, I'm meeting with the private property owner tomorrow, and I hope to reach a level of understanding as to whether or not there's a chance of assembling the full site.
And before you go on, so I'm assuming that obviously if the city's going to try to buy that parcel, that would be city funds, nothing to do with assessor agency.
That's correct.
funding. And now, on a site like this where you have mixed city and successor agency properties, how are you dividing up your admin costs? I mean, are you trying to, if it's going to go to a city, are these city costs for admin expenses, not assessor agency? You see what I'm saying?
Admin of the,
Well, you had, your costs and your city staff costs and there's people associated with these properties. Are you keeping track of, I'm just trying to say, you're not taking all these costs, including
The
the.
admin allowance would not be used to
Okay.
acquire.
That's my question.
Yeah, no.
Okay, thank you.
so the property information on screen identifies the assembled site. The 1.14 acres is the to be assembled site. It is not yet under consistent ownership. Project goals, like I've described, includes primarily the acquisition of the property from the successor agency, leading to its full dissolution eventual, and a development of a mixed-use affordable housing, active retail development on the site.
Can I ask you one question? Do you mind going back to the map? I'm going to make you work out on this thing. I think you got it down by now. The pink site, have you considered condemning the property?
Not yet.
What would lead you to that determination, I guess, strategically? Getting nowhere?
I don't know yet. We haven't actually considered that. I suppose the housing authority might consider that for the sake of developing affordable housing. It's not in a condition that is not run down, it's maintained, it is vacant dirt, but it is not in a condition that needs condemnation. It's essentially in the way of the idea for development. So at this point, we're not considering it. We may.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Powers,
Please.
just a quick comment. This has come up before, and I don't want to throw this hardball at you, but we've heard this in their committee before. We're going to meet with them tomorrow. I would have expected you'd been able to meet ahead because we're not meeting every week here to make decisions. Comment closed.
I can appreciate that for sure. And I wish I had a better update for you. The property owner is in Glendale. I have reached out to them. I've talked to him a couple of times. I'm driving to Glendale to have a conversation. I did tell him that we were coming here today. Didn't seem to matter to him, but I'm meeting with him tomorrow. Next steps, I'm sure you guys know the process completely, but we are looking to acquire the property for as we discussed. We are going to make an offer, I think, that we would be making an offer that is consistent with the parameters of the long-range property management plan. I say that because the long-range property management plan includes a process by which we would seek a land write-down from the successor agency if we were to comply with stated objectives, that being job creation and affordable housing production. And so we do intend on both of those factors, and therefore seeking that write-down of value in offer that we submit to the oversight or to the successor agency. I'm going the wrong way. Some challenges, as I mentioned, it's just scattered ownership. We need to assemble it. It's bisected by the alley. The alley itself would be in the middle of the project, and we may end up having to issue 2 separate RFPs to develop 2 halves. We hope not. Opportunities, it is part of the new downtown code, and I think making it easier for its entitlement and development. It could be by right, given compliance with the downtown code. It's mostly owned by the city of Oxnard, and the city, I think at this point, is prepared to encumber the cost of acquisition or assembly of the full site. Here's a description of the project. As I mentioned already, mixed use, about 6 stories tall, ground floor retail, maybe cultural amenities fronting in 7th versus fronting in Oxnard. And we'll have to see how much of that affordable housing could be also included for permanent supportive housing. The image on screen is just a image that we found online. It's not a rendering. We have not talked to a developer, an architect. It's not an actual design. Okay, that's our presentation. Adam and I are both happy to answer any questions. I will say that the other successor-owned sites that are not part of this presentation, we are also looking at, and we will develop a plan similar to here and come back to you. Those other ones are a little tougher because it requires more assembly, but we are working on those right now.
Yeah, just to reiterate, our purpose here is to get all this stuff wound up. So I appreciate your diligence. I appreciate what you've got to do an assembly. Assemblies are very difficult to do, in case you haven't done those. And you're trying to get something that works with your management plan. So those are all good things. What I'm looking for, and I think the rest of the board will concur, is some times and dates, and a plan, something we can track with a path. So I haven't heard, other than this one parcel, that you'll know in the next 90 days. So if we came back in 6 months, you'd have a much more updated plan on those particular assets. But there's the balance of the assets. Maybe I missed something. Was there a time element or plan on those that you saw? No. Okay, so I think we need to get to that, if that makes sense.
Agreed. We do need to get to that, and while I don't have a timeline and I can't express one to you right now, I can assure you that we are actively looking at all of those sites, and we're trying to figure out whether we would develop them independently or after some more land assembly.
Which is the reason why we're having this meeting, so maybe we can communicate it, and it's up to what the board wants to do, but maybe we can get you back in 6 months as well when we have some of the other cities, and maybe you'll have a path that's a little more clear in respect to the other parcels, so we can
6 months.
drill down on that. Is that reasonable?
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Welcome, Board Member Driscoll.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you.
I'll make the motion and add to it for the request for Moore Park and Oxnard to report back in 6 months. I think Fillmore's in a good position right now, so I don't see that need.
I would second that.
And next we have number 9, agenda item 9 regarding admin costs. Staff, do you have anything to start with?
Sure. At the last meeting, board requested that the successor agencies provide their admin costs for 2021. We provided them a template, and they were all responsive in filling out that template and generating a budget for those years. There are a lot of schedules, obviously, and we have a summary of that of some sort, just to kind of hone in on you know, what they're actually asking for 2021 and some of the differences from the current year to 2021 to see and highlight those. If they could put that up. Part of these columns that we're looking at, this is just strictly based on what DOF had expressed to us as some of the guiding areas, and gosh, that does not look good. But you each have the actual spreadsheet on your desk, and I apologize to the public that you guys don't have that. But anyways, especially on the first three columns, we have some of the areas that kind of generate the cost of the admin budgets.
Sorry, can I interrupt? Can you, Jessica, can you ask him to zoom that spreadsheet a little bit more if you can? I don't know, we'll find out. Just a little bit less, obviously, so we can read the whole thing now. That's better.
Yeah. So as I was saying, the first three columns, these are the ones that in speaking with DOF, kind of some of the areas that they looked at, and you know, as you know, some of the successor agencies had received letters from the DOF, and they outlined that, you know, that the board needed to do some additional work and exercise their fiduciary duty in reviewing these. So that's kind of why we're here. But the first one is the number of ROPS line items. The second one is bond-related line items, and then the number of properties held. So anyways, it just kind of gives you some context as to what the successor agencies have to deal with in order to come up with their costs for admin. And as you can see, in the yellow, that's what they're requesting for 2021. And then in the blue, that's just the differences between the 2 years. And so, you know, as I said, they provided the schedules, and there's a lot of information in there as to why there's differences and that sort of thing. So I don't know how much in detail you guys want to go through that, but most are here, I'm sure, to answer any of your questions. So with that, I mean, that's all I really have.
I just want to clarify, the max is 250 they can request.
The minimum is 250.
Minimum, sorry, it's 250. Okay.
I don't know if I've ever seen anything over 250,000 being paid. I think it's this weird little minimum, maximum.
Yeah, I'm not.
The calculation confuses
Please, I
me.
can clarify. The minimum could be zero, as in Piru, but the maximum that the DOF has to permit without an agreement is 250. So if someone requests 250 and they can't come to an agreement, the Department of Finance to lower it, and your board doesn't lower it, that has to be the number for the budget. It can be anywhere between that. It can be over that if they can justify it and the Department of Finance agrees with your approval of something over that.
I guess my question is, if we were to look at one of these and some organization submits 250, but if we look at it and we say, well, we already see 200, we can't question it then?
No, you can question any amount, and you can ask for substantial evidence to confirm the need for that amount. That's your role. That's what the Department of Finance is saying is your fiduciary duty.
What's our step? If we do that, and if we see that, do we just make that statement, or we tell the Department of Finance, or we go back to the city?
You, before you make the final decisions on these in January, have to come to a determination of what the evidence supports. So what you need to ask for is evidence supporting, supporting the budget requests.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the objective here, I think, was last time it was in January, and we had no time to review them. So what we're here to do is put our fiduciary hats on, delve into it, give the city the time to respond, so when it comes to January for the final, we know what direction, you have the intel you need to make a decision. I think that's what we're trying to do here. That's why we're getting a jump on it. 'Cause normally, we wouldn't see these till December.
But council, we don't have the ability to arbitrarily set a number.
No, any number you approve has to be supported by substantial evidence.
I'll let somebody else go first if you have any comments. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you got the mic.
No, I just say, well, why don't we go down the list? I would start with the ones where the DOF had a
Concerns?
letter. Let's go over those individual cities and get the intel, let them support it, and we can request whatever we need and go, as I would prioritize that. The ones that did not, we certainly should review those as well, but I wouldn't start with those.
Is a representative from Camarillo present?
Good morning, members of the board. Brian Ritchie, Accounting Manager, City of Camarillo.
Good morning. So I guess first question I'd ask, you have 0 properties you're liquidating, so you're just paying off debt.
That's correct, yes.
And the costs associated, you're saying, are reporting, they're reduced from this year, from prior year, I should say, I guess this year for next year. Can you give us a little update or background as to what types of costs you're incurring to make up this amount?
Sure. So it's mainly staffing costs. So for the financial reporting of the successor agency, type of reconciliations. We also have some consulting that we hire for our ROPS preparation annually. And that's pretty much it for it. And that's why you do see a decrease here. And I don't believe they have the schedule up that shows the actuals, how it's trending year over year, but it's fairly conservative compared to what we've
Can we get their
actually had.
the report on the screen?
I think we're okay with it.
Okay, we're okay.
We're okay. No, please continue.
Okay. And then along with the staffing costs, we also have, obviously, we have our auditing costs, which is about $4,500 a year. So also fairly conservative there. We have our bond disclosure costs is another $7,500. And that brings us to the total of $93,500 that we're estimating.
So if I asked, and this is kind of a question for everyone, and I guess to start that this isn't, I know these are going to be hard questions sometimes, but my perspective is, this hypothetical maybe of 2-3 years from now when the Department of Finance rains down maybe and audits entities, audits this board for what our oversight was over these entities. Is it defendable? Is what you're doing defensible from an evidentiary perspective, and that you would pass those audits and that we would be satisfied with you passing those audits? So that's kind of perspective I'm coming from when asking these questions. And I guess, and this is a public meeting, and there's actuals being reported here. So I guess my question to you will be to everyone is, can you attest to these actuals that you're reporting?
Yes, sir, we can attest to the actuals. We have the documentation.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
I noticed that, and maybe this is why the DOF in their letter was questioning the admin budget. I noticed in looking at the admin cost spreadsheet that the 18-19 actuals was $59,000, and then the 19-20 budget was $100,000. And I don't, yet there are 0 properties, and I don't know, it looks like staff time is what increased, but I'm not quite certain what actual activities took place in this 19-20 budget year to increase. And then I see 2021 proposed budget is less, but it's not to the level where it was at 18-19. It looks like there was an upward trajectory, and I just don't know why.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. When we're preparing the budget, we try to be conservative in terms of, like if you look back at 17-18, the staffing costs was around $75,000. So it went from $68,000 to $75,000 to $46,000. So we're trying to keep it in that general ballpark still, but at least allow us ourselves to have room if the staffing did increase. So like, for example, one of the things that we were looking into is possibly a last and final ROPS, which takes a little bit more administrative work as well, which can increase the budget. So we thought 80,000 was a fair estimate for the year based on historicals.
And when you're projecting, looking at a last and final ROPS?
Well, after going through some of the evaluations, we've tabled that for now. We want to make sure that we keep our options open in terms of our refunding, because there's only 2 amendments that you can make once you do your last and final ROPS, and it locks you in to that rate. So that's one of the things that we've been looking at, but for now, we're going to continue with our annual.
But on the 2021, are you projecting a final ROPS? Is that why you have the additional money in there?
Possibly, yes, possibly.
Okay. And how much, I don't do what you do, so when you go ahead and do your work, you're filling out forms, you have no properties to manage, and you have to make sure you get the audits coordinated annually. So again, we're going back to what's changed so much. Because you got a $9,000 credit for money you didn't use. So going from a $47,000 cost to a projected $90,000 cost, now to an $80,000 cost, and you don't know if you're going to do are you projecting, just so I understand clarity, that if you do a final ROPS, it's going to cost you another $30,000? Is that basically what you're coming up with?
It may not be 30,000, but it could cost another 15,000 in terms of the consulting that we have to go out for in terms of preparing that. Yes. But
And then from a technical point of view, the $9,000 credit, which you didn't use, who made that determination that you didn't use it? Is that something the DOF looks at? I don't know the process. I'm just trying to.
in terms of the
Well, if you don't spend all your budget and you have if I understand what I've read so far, and these are, again, we're new at this too, so we're not, you happen to be the first person we can ask these questions to. So lucky you. And so don't take that, we're going to ask everybody the same question. If there's a credit of items that you didn't spend, we're supposed to apply that to the next year, and that's what you did here. Is that correct?
yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. So who determines how much that credit is and who verifies it? I know you come up with that number. Is that verified by DOF on your submittals, or?
Yeah, there's a true-up process. So then they'll look at the actuals that we present on the next year's ROPS and determine that, and then there's a true-up based on what the proposal was.
And the true-up is with whom? Which agency?
With the county.
With the county? Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand, I mean, all you're doing is taking the payments in and paying a bond payment, correct? I mean, I don't see why it costs this much money to make an annual. You're making bond payments, what, 3 times a year or 4 times a year, maybe?
Roughly
I know you got 5 different bonds.
Yeah, 2 or 3 times a year, yes, sir.
And it costs, you're asking for 90,000 plus to make 4 bond payments. I don't understand why it takes that much labor, especially when I look down at Simi Valley. They have 5 bonds, and they're about half your cost. I don't understand why it costs so much to make a bond payment.
Sure. Well, it's not only the bond payments, but it's also the financial reporting aspect of it. So when we prepare our city CAFR, for example, we have to include the successor agency as a fiduciary fund in the CAFR. There's a treasury aspect to it. So we have a separate bank account. We're cutting checks, so there's administrative work with that. There's a reconciliation aspect in terms of preparation of the ROPS.
Well, again, so in my background, I'm with the Pleasant Valley Rec and Park District in Camarillo. They recover the area. And I'm not sure what you guys are doing specifically, but we have a bond. We have to pay it out. We make payments on it. I can tell you in our budget, we don't spend anywhere near this to handle our bond payment. We have to handle, it's a little bit different, but again, I don't see how the numbers can add up to this large of a total expense. It's what I'm trying to get my hands wrapped around. I don't understand that, because in our organization, we're paying off a bond, we're doing that. We got to allocate, we have to have meetings and show where the money's going, and we have a separate budget and all those types of things. Yet, if we were to add up all our costs, I know it wouldn't be anywhere near this. I mean, I just don't understand why it adds up, because you're not doing anything with those three. You still have those three properties, and I know the city is doing something with them, at least two of them. I think the third one's just sitting out there somewhere. But I just don't understand why it costs so much to do that. I'm just trying to get a handle on it. I don't see how just making automatic, because you're not doing it, you're not changing the bonds, you're not going out to refinance them, correct?
Sure. No, we're not.
So
right now.
you're just doing maintenance on the existing bonds.
Let me recommend this. I get the spirit of your questions, and we get the first gentleman here to give his response. Let's move forward and continue the narrative, though, because we have a lot of cities to go through. But I think that can also, you're welcome to address these questions as well from your city's perspective as well. I didn't get your name, sir?
Brian Ritchie.
Brian, thank you. Very well.
Members of the board.
Anybody have any questions, further questions, sir? Thanks. Next, I'd like to ask Fillmore to come back up, please.
Good morning, Board. Galen Bryan, City of Fillmore, Finance Director.
I'll ask first, though, do you have any comments to the questions we've been asking already, just to give you an opportunity?
Yeah, I can, understand the questions that you're asking. How, does it really cost this much to manage the RDA properties? I know that the city, we do put in a lot of time from our planning department. We have three properties that are, or two properties that are in development stages, and then we have our town theater, and that does take a lot of staff time. We use our planning department and our engineering department, which is not on there, but we have our engineering department also involved in our process. We have city attorney cost involved. They're currently developing the development agreements for the two developers that we have in line to purchase and develop the two properties. We have audit cost. We have bond payments to make. I try to be reasonable in the cost, but,
I wanted to ask a question. I'll start. On the city manager side, and I saw the 320 hours as charge of the city manager. Part of it is to educate, in the description, to educate the city council on issues related to the successor agency.
okay.
Do you see that as part of
Yeah,
administrative costs?
yeah, the city manager, and just to let you know, these are identified positions, it's kind of in general. There's also other staff involved in this process, they might not be identified on this list, but so in general, city manager, currently our city manager is involved in selling the town theater and working through the RFP process. He does provide management oversight and direction to staff, particularly the planning department. If they have questions come up about the project in review, they will go to the city manager for that. Also, the city attorney charges are not necessarily listed here. We do have significant city attorney costs involved in our process. And then, so city manager, and then we have the finance director. I'm involved in, all aspects of the successor agency, involved in working with the board here, with the requests that are required to provide information to the board here, also to the Department of Finance. They require documents and reports back to them for the Department of Finance. Also, there's audit costs, not necessarily, but I am involved in the audit. We also have a assistant finance director involved in the audit process and managing the RDA. And then we have our planning director, which I already mentioned earlier, and then our fiscal assistants. They're involved in processing accounts payable documents. If we have paid documents from city attorney, our engineering firm that we use, any kind of paid documents. The human resources is not as much. That was reduced from previous years because we report to this board now. Before, our city clerk was managing the board, and at that time, which I've reduced those hours for our city clerk.
Questions?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Please, go ahead.
You have something up there called admin expenses, 69,000. And I don't understand, I see some words in there, but I don't understand what they mean. I don't understand that. Can you explain, or something based on some previous stuff? I don't understand.
Yeah, well, the city implemented what we call a cost allocation plan, and it's been updated. So we update the plan and we look at how much time is spent on administrative tasks of the city. We look at finance costs, city council, city manager, any
So,
HR, any of the administrative functions, and we allocate those out according to what we call the direct departments, which would be successor agencies. So they would share in the administrative cost.
So what's the difference between that and what I see down below when you have city manager and other people listed?
Yeah, this would be the additional cost, because if the city manager is directly charging to successor agency, for example, that cost would be taken out of the administrative costs. That gets allocated out. This is the other remaining cost that is not directly charged to a direct department. This administrative cost in total would be the remaining cost
I'm
directly charged.
Well, maybe I can help a little bit. So a lot of cities, the way they allocate for departments, like if you were a nonprofit, how you allocate funds to a nonprofit for a grant, the city, in the case of your city,
Yes.
they have a category called administrative costs. So anytime there's a related cost to a department, you have an add-on cost to the administrative cost. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's per ordinance.
Yes. Right.
That's what it is. It's not like if you're running a business and you had an assistant there and you could put that direct cost and all the related costs in it. So there's so many departments and nobody's full-time on this thing. So they have a number they put in there, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yes.
okay. And then if I look at your hours, like the city manager, 320, I mean, that's roughly, I'm just rounding that off. That's 16% of the city manager's time is doing nothing but this? Is that what you're saying? Because that's what equivalent, I mean,
Yes.
I use a 2,000 hour per
Yeah,
year.
2,080 hours, right.
And so that's roughly, 16% of the city manager's time. I mean, that's a lot of time spent on this. I mean, for a couple of properties, I don't know, I mean,
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and maybe it's a little bit high, but then you have to also consider there might be other positions also working on successor agency, not listed here, so we try to pull out all the major staffing.
And you made a good point about the theater, and I understand the complexity and the sensitivity to that with the council and such. So in that regard, that somewhat calms me in terms of concerns.
where I'm coming from and where I have a problem, and I've always operated in private industry. I mean, now I'm on the board with the park district, but when I was put in charge of a project, I was put in charge of a project. And if I had to go running up and keep bothering and asking questions and asking for help to the people up above me, I wouldn't, I wouldn't be a project manager working on the project. I mean, I worked at Exxon. I worked on major projects that were running years and years. And I know one project went on for 3 years. I only had to go up once to ask one question one time, or maybe an hour at the most. And that was over 3 years. I mean, I give updates and stuff, but I would expect to see where someone's put in charge of this or overseeing this and working, coordinating, and you wouldn't have to drag in your city manager into issues that maybe.
Well,
Yeah,
okay, and I'm a consultant, so I can certainly relate to what you're saying. And then I became a city council member, and I had to look at through their eyes as well. So let me try to match them, because it's a great question, and I had all those questions my first 2 years on city council. When you do a consulting project, you go out there and you deal with the facts of the project itself. And what they have to also deal with, which may or may not be the case in Fillmore, I know it is in Moore Park, as I've been involved with on the city council over there, is there are community meetings, there's people who don't like the project, that requires city attorneys, the city attorney to get involved, it requires the city manager to get involved. Nothing to do with the actual factual disposing of a piece of property and then with that facts. So there's an overlay of other stuff that a city has to deal with that we as a consultant, so for instance, I know Moore Park's going to be hiring a consultant. That consultant's going to deal with one aspect of the sale, but the city's got to do all the other stuff that when the stuff hits the fan, they've got to go ahead and deal with it. So the question is that a chargeable item is something that can be passed through. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not defending, I'm just saying, look at through those eyes a little bit as well. And that may be a portion of it.
Okay, thank you.
Would you expect any of these items to be going down over time?
Yeah, I
mean,
would
obviously,
think. Oh, sorry.
I mean, you're working your properties through there, and you're trying to get them down.
Yes, I would suspect in fiscal year 21, 22, definitely they will go down. Those costs should go down.
If you sell those 3 properties you listed earlier,
Yeah.
it would go down
Yeah, it should go down significantly.
2021.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it could be part of 2021.
So your proposed budget right now is assuming the same number it was in, every year, 250.
Right,
And if you relieve those properties, we'd hope to see a different result
right, yeah,
for next year.
yeah.
And I think we're going to give another opportunity for submittals. What's the next board meeting we have? Is there one set for October, do you know?
Yes.
Okay.
Fourth Wednesday of October.
Okay, so there's another opportunity to reevaluate this. So we're just asking
Okay.
questions today.
Okay, thanks.
Well, let me just ask, how much of this is basically related, going back to Camarillo, which is just doing bond maintenance? Is that a minor part of this, I'm assuming? In which, we were talking about these 3 properties and stuff. I guess that's the majority of this work effort?
Oh, it's not a part of it, not a majority of it, is managing the bonds, but we also have auditors and involved. There's a lot, in the finance area, there's a lot of process involved. Even though you're just paying bonds, you still have to prepare financial statements, you have to still get them audited, you're still reporting to Department of Finance, you're still reporting to this board.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
I just had a question. Oh, one more question. So I'm looking at that page 1, proposed budget, top line, direct cost staffing. And then for 2021, 159,872. And maybe you answered this question. I'm sorry if you did. And I look at the bottom half for the breakdown of the staffing cost, and it's 105,932.
That includes benefits. The 105,000 is
Salary
labor,
only?
salary only.
Okay,
And
so
then
the top
that
includes payroll expense, benefits, everything else?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. City of Moore Park? Next.
Good morning. Kevin Brahani for City of Moore Park, Finance Director.
Do you have anything to say before we ask any questions, or you're welcome to?
Our story is similar to their process, and the only thing that I could add is that our hours are not directly the hours that staff have worked. It's based on a percentage that was allocated to each of those department heads or those staff that worked within those.
I'm sorry, can you speak up?
I'm sorry, yes. The hours are based on a percentage that was allocated to each of those individuals. And we just apply that percentage to the total hours that they work. And that's why they seem to be a little bit higher than the other ones.
So how are they allocated?
So let's say the assistant to city manager, let's say he's charging 50% of his time to successor agencies function. So naturally, if he's working 2,080 hours per year, then 50% of that will be applied. I'm just assuming based on a percentage. I don't know what his
I understand.
is. It's just that was an example.
So the assistants, the city manager is making that determination of the amount of work they put into this? Or your staff?
Yes,
or
at
finance?
some point they had done a study and determined that the percentage that should be allocated to successor agency was that, and in those previous years, that was what was used. And the other thing that could add as to other expenses, like you're mentioning related to bonds, there are procurement processes that also staff need to do in order to hire these consultants. So that is pretty involved process itself. and in dealing with trustees, dealing with accounts payable, anything that relates to them as well. So those are what wasn't said, but if you have any specific questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
One sec. Jessica, can you ask him to put the other spreadsheet up? This is not serving us too well, I don't think. I can't read it. But the oversight one, I mean, the one that you started with? This one? Yeah. Helps give more context, I think. So who would like to ask any questions first?
Sure. When you want to go over the overhead cost request of 27,000, what's that for?
I'm sorry, which line item was it?
Well, we have our breakdown sheet that's a little different than yours.
Okay.
We're getting there.
We're getting there.
If we're looking at fiscal year 1920 or 2021, I'm not sure what that one was.
I think he's looking at the increase.
We have a separate sheet.
Increase, okay.
Yeah, so 2021
relates
is
to the-
140,000 increase over the prior year.
Yes, that relates to the property disposition plan that was presented earlier. The hours that will be involved, plus the overhead costs, which is part of that cost plan allocation that they were speaking of earlier. Those are all related, and the involvement of the consultants that needed to get rid of those properties. And
Well, does that include the cost of the consultant?
I'm sorry,
Does that include the cost of the consultant?
estimated costs.
Estimated cost.
Yes.
So that includes the third party.
Yes.
So what
They are all projected, I might say. Yes, I'm sorry.
So what I see for 2021, so for perspective, for the current year budget, for the 250,000 admin, the DOF thought that was, they had concerns with that amount. They thought it was high. So for 2021, you're asking for $390,000, $929.
That's a good question.
And I see some of the, and I'm looking at, this is the ROPS admin costs. I think this is page 3 of your document. It's a good summary between the years. So I'm looking at the changes between 1920 budget and 2021 budget. So I see staffing has gone up a little bit, but I see legal expenses gone from 2,000 to 102,000.
Unfortunately, I think you're looking at the different page because the cutoff on this one is 1920, not 2021.
I'm
Yeah,
looking at what's in front of me.
Yeah, it's the wrong page that's up, I think.
Yeah,
You can bring up
maybe the very,
of the spreadsheet. The other part A.
I think it's page 3 of 3 of ours.
That
Yes,
looks like
this
it.
is it.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yes, the legal expenses includes all of the consultants that are involved in this process, and not necessarily legal per se, but other consultants as well. But there were no other categories that we could distribute them to, so.
So what's changed this next coming year as opposed to the prior 5 years in terms of legal expenses?
Well, that will be 2021.
Yes.
The current ROPS period that we're in is 1920, which is pretty much similar to prior years. What we're looking at is 2021, which the costs are going up simply because of these properties that we're disposing. And again,
Well, what I see going up is when you look at the detail, it's the legal, but what I'm hearing is that it's not legal necessarily. There's
It's-
disposition consultants.
whatever consultants that are needed, like appraisal
Consultants.
services. And
It'd probably fall under other professional services.
yes,
Categorization.
Right.
yes, we're trying to keep it.
And then I see that the indirect cost has more than doubled. I mean, that's half the budget is indirect cost. I mean, that
Yes.
really seems really excessive, half your budget.
Yes, and the reason for that is, as you can see, in the understaffing costs, the city manager's office and finance departments time charges are not part of those direct charges listed below. So therefore, they're part of that cost allocation plan that we're talking about, and their involvement will naturally be more pertaining to these dispositions.
Can I ask you a question, Olive? I mentioned the notion of this being, if you're audited in future life,
Yes.
future years, and you don't have a labor costing system, I mean, at that level, if you're just taking allocations, I assume.
Right.
How are you going to defend those hours of 2,800 hours per year, 2,710 hours per year, spent on these actions? How would you show that?
Well, if the direction is to do so prospectively, we will be charging direct hours. But in prior years, obviously, there was no clear indication from Department of Finance as to how you should, substantiate those charges. So it was a common practice for cities to use percentage allocations, charging their time. So if we have to, we could probably go back, look at the activities, and reconstruct the hours and the time it took to do those to the best that we can.
So I guess one of the pieces, and I'm seeing a bit of a theme, and we discussed it earlier, is we're looking at numbers, not necessarily knowing the full plan behind the numbers, especially when they increase. So I'm having a little difficulty making that nexus. I'm hearing that there's 5 properties to dispose of, and
4, yes.
for the
4 or 5, I'm sorry. It's
5.
oh,
Have the
our
wrong
sheet
glasses
says
on,
5. Yeah,
Yeah,
but the city has properties to dispose of.
yes.
And so just not knowing what the plan is for 2021 is a little, as to, what, I feel like that's the other side of this coin, to fully understand why there's requests for increases.
Yes, and I think they made a presentation earlier going over some of those plans, but it could be, we could bring more if you like and go over it at the next meetings
And I
details.
apologize, I missed that.
Yes.
But I'll be able to watch it, since it's being recorded.
No worries, and we'd be more than happy to
time.
present it again if you like.
Yeah,
So was the plan to wrap up?
yeah, there was a plan to hire a third-party company to dispose of the properties. But again, remember what we're here for is we're taking the initial steps. What we're hearing is, here's how it was done in the past. Okay, that's fine. Now the question is, how do we want it in the future? And what was offered up is, if you want to go ahead and look at specific hours allocations, which is something that a couple of us on the board are used to, you can request that. But the process here is to unwind what was done before, get our hands around what's going here today before January, because they're going to submit a final in January. Our objective is to have a thorough understanding, do some comfort level that we've done our fiduciary to say, yeah, this makes sense, let's move forward with it. And that's all we're here to
I
do.
got to point out, though, according to the spreadsheet, they're recommending $390,000 of an admin budget, which is well for next year.
Right. So we have to be able to delve into that and see if it's justified.
Correct, yeah. And thus the need for some specifics and answers.
Anyone else have any questions? I don't want to take over.
Yeah, I would request that they come back and get the detail on the hours versus an assumptive percentage of hours. So on a go-forward basis, I think we're going to be a little more filtering as to how the money's being spent, so we can say we've done our fiduciary responsibility.
Absolutely.
Is that fair?
Do you want to talk about next month then? Have them come back with a plan for how they plan to enforce and
It's
keep
up to
track
you.
and account?
We talked about 6 months on the other ones, but, this is September, so that's going to be after the January situation. So, maybe we want to relook at that too. This is September, we have October, November, and December, and then January, we have to approve these ROPS.
But
We don't have to.
Oh, we don't have
For the record.
to? Yeah.
This is the only leverage we really have at this point, but just want to make that clear.
But there's no planned meetings in November or December, right?
No, not right now.
So that's the reason I mentioned October,
Are you
because
prepared to come back in a month?
We are going through an annual audit at the moment.
I'll take that as a yes.
But yes, we'll be more than happy to.
And can I ask just a general question of staff? As I'm looking through all of these, noticing indirect costs, they're all over the board with percentages the percentages are all over the board. Was that can staff, city staff put basically any number in there that they feel represents them? It's not formula-driven, I guess is what I'm trying to ascertain. It's not formula-driven, it's what city staff believe. Is that correct?
Yes,
It's their number.
right,
Okay, whatever that may be,
correct.
however they determine
Way
it
they
to be.
calculate it. I think we have to realize this is the first time all these siloed successor agencies we've crafted all of their numbers together and look at them in a holistic perspective. And so we're all trying to digest this as well. And, you can't make for rhyme or reason. And also the understanding that those aren't the same animals. I mean, just because you have 5 properties doesn't mean they're as easy as the other 5 properties that Oxnard may have or something. So there's a lot of complexity within those first 3 columns, I would argue, that we can't really necessarily get to that level of detail. But we're trying to get our arms around this and squeeze a little bit and trying to understand, at least at this point, what you're experiencing and to defend it to us. And so next month, we'd hope to make that step a little further. And we'd like to do it now as opposed to December and January when we get up close to ROPS being approved. And we haven't had that conversation in a real way. And this is happening all over the state, so this isn't new. So I think we have that responsibility. Anyone else? I'm sorry, I didn't get your name, sir?
Kevin Borhani.
Ken, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Ventura. Good morning.
Good morning.
You have a chance to speak first, if you'd like.
Yes. Our city, or our successor agency, went to legal counsel when the law came out, and it stated that you either got 3% of your ROPS for admin costs or a minimum of $250,000. That's what we took, was the legal language of being $250,000. So that's what we would always request, was the $250,000. This particular year coming up, we're reducing our amount. What you see is that we are now coming down almost $100,000. What we also contended was we had to have something that was defensible to Department of Finance. At that time, the redevelopment agency was under a cost allocation plan that the city developed using all of the other departments, city manager, legal, finance, our IT, our facilities, was all broken down, and we had a actual council-approved cost allocation, and that's what we kept at. At that time, that cost allocation plan was based upon a larger RDA, and we had a lot more room, we had a lot more services, and until that cost allocation plan changed and was updated, we maintained that amount in our admin. In 2021, that admin cost has significantly come down, and that's why you see a big portion of that. One of the things that I have found, I'm the staff member for the RDA. I have to deal with doing ROPS, coming before you and preparing all the reports, actually updating our council, our successor agency and council on everything. So every time we have a new council member, I have to go through the whole thing, which is the whole process of the admin reports. And anytime we have director changes, I have to report to them and update them on the whole process. Same thing with finance, updating everybody in finance about what's going on with the law. And that's what I've been mainly doing. Also, our merged project area was our downtown. And so we have all of the historical information for all those properties down there. So anytime there's a development that happens, guess who's being called to find all that information? That's successor agency work. That's not city work, that's successor agency work, and that's what I bill my time for, charge my time for. Also, when the Department of Finance gets our ROPS, they're calling us for all of the backup documentation, which means trying to teach people who are not finance-based what they're looking at when it comes to finance documents. Then the county calls us. They want all the documentation for all the financial backup, so we have to send that. And so you're talking about not just doing the properties. City of Ventura has chosen, I don't charge to the successor agency admin for our properties. Our properties are in a property trust fund. I charge to that. We recoup that money when we sell the properties because that's city at that point for us. So all of these costs, with me being the remaining person, you'll see that on our sheet I have like 1,600 hours. And that's defensible because I'm charging that on my timesheet. I have that work on my calendar. And I'm doing that. That's all that other work that we do for this wind down. And then every time Department of Finance changes something, you're then having to go back and deal with auditors and everybody else to convince them you did it correctly at the time that law was in place. Now it's changed, now you're updating, and that's all because they don't care. They're asking you the question saying the law states this, and you're having to say 6 months ago it said something else. That's what we were bound by. So that's how we substantiated what our costs are. On our sheet, you'll see that there's a lot of legal. We have 2 items on our OPS that have not been approved by Department of Finance yet. Those are sponsor entity loans. We've jumped through all the hoops, done everything DOF has required of us. Trying to get those on the ROPS is admin costs. It's my time, it's our outside legal time, it's our internal time above what the allocation is, the admin cost allocation. We're looking at a possible increase because we're trying to decide whether or not we are going to sue the Department of Finance for not approving our first one. Until that time when we decide to sue, the costs are borne by the successor agency. If we do choose to sue, then the legal costs will be borne by the city at that point. So we've made all those determinations. We've done a lot of work. It's not just the sale of properties. It's not just cutting the checks for the bond. Also, what we do, if it comes in under what I've budgeted, let's say I budget a bond payment of being $150,000 a year from now. Interest rates or anything change, or there's an adjustment of some sort, and it comes out to $160,000. Where do I get that other $10,000 from? I've only requested $150,000 on the ROPS. I can pull $10,000 from my admin and pay that. So those are some things that we do, and it wasn't until the Department of Finance started coming back and saying, well, we know what the law says. We're going to change our mind. Now, and as people have wound down, that's fine, but they don't take into account every time they change the law, we have to do more work. Who's going to be paying for that? The cities can't. It's not theirs. We're winding down this agency, so it's still their cost. So that's just my take on, we're doing a lot of work. It's not just paying upon payment. We're having to do a lot of explanation, a lot of meetings, a lot of writing. So I hope that answers some questions. Is there anything specific about our budget that you have for me?
I have one.
Yes.
Thank you for that understanding. And you mentioned it kind of on your administrative ISF costs. It's not on that list, but it's been consistently at $99,000, and then this year it's cut down to $8 or $9 grand.
Yeah.
Can you help me understand what that number, 99 grand, represented and why 3 years in a row?
Well, again, the last cost allocation plan was done several years ago when the RDA was at its highest. Actually, it was done like in 2008, 2007, 2008. And at that time, we had a staff of about 8 people in the RDA. Plus, we had so much more happening. We had a bigger room. We had a lot of square footage. So all of our facility costs were based upon square footage. Mm-hmm. A lot of the HR costs, all that were bound based on numbers of salaries involved. Our IT, our council, our city manager, our legal were all by how many items are coming before the city council and all that. So any of the times that an RDA thing was happening, they would take that in the cost allocation and say, okay, you're coming to council 10 times a year. So, and they work it all out. I mean, each one has a different calculation.
Yeah, and the city doesn't evaluate that on an annual basis?
No, they had not been because of all the changes. This, believe me, every year I kept telling them, I need an updated amount. And when it comes to defensible, I mean, that was the document that was approved by board at the time or council at the time. So as soon as that changed, that's when I changed our amounts.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions? Thank you, Dory.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm Dory Boyer. I'm a management analyst for Community Development Department, City of Ventura.
And is Thousand Oaks present?
Good morning, Vice Chair Powers, board members. My name is Jamie Boscarino. I'm the Finance Director for the City of Thousand Oaks. And so just based on the theme of the questions here, Thousand Oaks, similar to Ventura, allocates costs based on a cost allocation plan. And so we allocate all of our central service costs, whether it's our city manager's office, our city attorney's office, finance department, based on allocation factors. and take our accounting division and our finance department, for example, we go into various jobs that they do, so accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, et cetera, and we allocate costs based on those different functions of our divisions. So similar to Ventura, our cost allocation plan was developed 5 years ago. We just did an RFP to go with a new consultant to update our allocation plan. We look at it every 5 years, relook at all of our allocation factors, see if any of the functions that we perform change at all, and update our allocations based on new work and how things have changed. So we're going through that process right now. That won't be completed till the end of June, probably next year. So unfortunately, we have to do this process significantly in advance of fiscal year 2021. So we're still working based on our old cost allocation plan. But through that, that's how we've been allocating our indirect costs for all of our central service departments to the successor agency. And then you can see our direct costs are just related to our community development department. We have 2 bond issuances, and we have several grants that we have to ensure that they adhere to the provisions related in the grants, and so that's what our community development department is doing in their direct costs for those staffing costs. And then this is our Assistant City Attorney, Patrick Heher.
And good morning, and first I want to say I appreciate your comments and your questions, because it helps us with direction as to maybe modifying in the future for what we have to do through your guidance. And Board Member Simons, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, you made some comments about how city functions, and I know, Mr. Mishler, you had some questions about times and timing and how much time it takes for certain things. And I will tell you that on an aside, yesterday I met with 3 different separate council members for a matter for last night at council, and I wasn't expected to be at those meetings, but each meeting totaled about an hour of my time, and it was totally unexpected, but it had to do with matters that were going to be before the council. Might be political issue, might be a legal issue, of course, and so sometimes these things take effect. I'm here also because in our case, there's obviously a bump up in legal fees that you would note for 2021. And I was asked by the finance director to look at our costs and our time for this next year. And we have a campus master plan that could affect 2 properties that are covered by the ROPS. One is what we call our west side properties, and one is our east side property. And the east side property has a very complicated DDA that might be involved. And again, it's about being requested to estimate time, right? So I'm looking at percentages. Right now, we're doing percentages of our time. And we have 2 attorneys, the city attorney and me for assistant city attorney, as I handle land use. And it was trying to come up with an estimate of how much of our percentage of our year is going to be based on these issues. And when we looked at our campus master plan that we're going through right now and our general plan that we're going through right now, it triggered the fact that we're going to spend a lot of time on these 2 properties. We also have a development agreement with a property that's being, again, resubmitted right now, and that has a bond on it that's affected by the ROPS. And so that bond is for that district, and because of the new change of the new plan for that development of that property, there is a guarantee in the DA that we had with that we have on that property. There is bond funding going to it, and now that they want to change the property, it's going to take some time. It's a little bit of time, but it's going to take time to go through that analysis for that bond to make sure that it's properly done and allocated. So again, it's not a perfect science, but we certainly did our best to estimate our time or percentage. You heard County Council talk about substantial evidence when it comes to allocating our cost. I will tell you for Thousand Oaks at least, we're very conscious of best practices for auditing, best practices for, obviously, for legal. And my duty as a lawyer is to ensure that if I'm giving my time, I'm allocating it appropriately and honestly and truthfully. So that's my initial statement, just because I certainly appreciate your comments. I was asked before to come here because we had a meeting and it says, okay, Patrick, what do you see for city attorney time? So after that meeting, I went to my boss and said, okay, we need to have a half an hour meeting and talk about where we are here, what percentages, because we want to be careful with this and make sure that we can establish it if we do it. And we certainly did that with our percentage. So that's why in this particular year coming up, 2021, it's higher because we anticipate a lot of work being done.
Okay, so I'm a little confused. and I'm easily confused. You said there's a new policy regarding time allocation with the city?
No, I think
Not
you made a comment that you understood how we allocate our time. It's a percentage.
Right, right. I'm saying, but I understand there's new time allocation being reviewed by the city, a policy for time allocations?
No, it was to look at our time allocation for this next 2021, and it was to ensure that what our percentage would be accurate. So we looked at what we anticipate for this next year and what's going on right now, actually, that are on properties affected by the ROPS, and we expect to expend a certain amount of time on that.
Okay, Ms. We asked, I know this, you're one of the two cities that requested a number higher than $250,000. And we're just trying to, whatever the number is, you deserve it if it's a deserved number.
Absolutely.
So I'm not going to, and in the real world, these are not large numbers for dealing with the properties and stuff like that. So are you willing to give us a breakdown like we asked the city of Moore Park?
Yeah, so it's interesting because the challenge of that is typically when I was in private practice, I billed every minute, right? Every 10 minutes, right? So we obviously don't do that in city work. But I heard you earlier when your comments, and I was asking myself, what would the challenge be for us and the city attorney to be very specific with our time for this particular usage?
Well, not
of
just
our
city
time?
attorney, but the entire city requests for funds. You're one aspect of it.
Sure. I mean, I think that would be a challenge. We'd have to think about how
Of course,
we
it's
do
a
that.
challenge, but
I understand. I think when it comes to defending our position and defending our numbers, I'm certainly, from the past and for the future, I'm not worried about that aspect of it, based on appropriate auditing principles. I'm not worried about doing that. As far as having more specific as to city attorney, for example, spent 10 hours in this week or 10 hours in this day on a project, it's going to be difficult to do that because we don't have that process in place right now.
Well, yeah, and I wasn't asking on just the city attorney aspect. I'm asking from the city of Thousand Oaks. I don't want to be unreasonable here either, but I also don't want to have one city do it, not have another city take a look at it.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying because I see that one line item of indirect cost, and it's the lion's share of the budget. At $209,000, and are you looking to get a better understanding of?
Well, again, they're one of the two cities that are requesting. I know I'm being very general here, but again, this is a process for us to understand. It's not so much as a challenge. I mean, we may challenge it after we see it, but I mean, I can tell you from my perspective, I've learned a lot today from what you folks do. And I think it's important that we all get on the same page as quickly as possible. And it's an exercise, yes, it does take time. And I'm assuming you can charge us back for that because it's going to require staff time to do that. But with that being said, for the initial run-through, I don't have an issue asking for it. But if nobody else wants to see it, we don't.
Well, I want to give you a little more context. I mean, you see on the board, we just give Camry a run-through for $100,000, and they have more properties and more ROPS than you, no properties and ROPS. And then you come at 274, you get the context of why we're asking these questions. And this is the first time we're looking at this in this whole 30,000-foot level. But the idea is to start, again, crafting a better approach to how we're going to charge our admin costs moving forward. Let's just leave it at that, I guess.
And most of our cost allocation plan is not allocated based on time spent. So you take our city manager's office, for example, it's allocated based on FTEs, which would be 0 for the successor agency because we don't have any successor agency employees. And it's also allocated based on budget. So how much is the budget for the successor agency in comparison to the entire city budget? What percentage is that? It gets that percentage of the total city manager department costs. So for city attorneys, it was based on their estimated time spent percentage, but most of the allocation factors are not related to time.
Yes.
Let me back up a little bit. When I look at that sheet, I haven't heard, I don't know the background for these different, but you have 0 properties, but then you just mentioned the east and west property. So I'm confused why you're talking about properties when you don't have any property. You see where I'm coming from, maybe?
Sure. So
I'm trying to understand.
Sure, understand. So under the management plan, we have identified, like, for example, the west side and the east side properties in our management plan. These are government-owned properties. But what could happen is, again, with the campus master plan, we are evaluating these locations. And
But these are city-owned properties now? I'm trying to understand what they are.
city-owned, yeah, city-owned.
Okay, so these are city-owned properties. So typically, at least with other cities are coming in, and you heard them.
Sure.
I mean, they keep, if it's a city-owned property, it's a city cost, right? Okay, so go ahead.
Understand, right. So, but these are identified as ones that are under our ROPS, correct? So what happens now is that we are looking at our plan, and it's a very significant plan, and it affects these two properties. We have options. One option is to keep it as is. One option is to modify it in some way with government use. One option is to sell the property and manage it or have a DA with it or just give it away, or, I mean, by selling it, of course. So if that happens, then obviously it triggers paying back the taxing entities for that cost. And so that's why when we look at this, we're focused on what's going to be the end game when it comes to what do we need and what does it affect for the ROPS, what does it affect for our reporting, and that's why, as right now, these two properties are highly involved in an analysis both from city as a whole and city attorney's office.
So the ROPS portion of the evaluation is a bill back, but all the other administrative costs for the city that under ownership, that, but uses, when you look at a use for a city-owned property, do you allocate 100% of that or 50% of that to the ROPS, to us, or do you look at it because you're a city-owned property and allocate zero to us?
For, what do you mean by use?
Well, you're talking about properties that are qualified under ROPS that are city-owned. So how's that allocation of time being allocated?
So the two properties are on our long-range property management plan. The west side, for example, our west side properties are, per the long-range property management plan, are designated governmental institutional use. That's not currently the use that they are right now. There were existing commercial buildings that were on the property. And so we're, as Patrick's speaking of the campus master plan, we're working on converting that use to a governmental property to adhere with the long-range property management plan use that is specified in there, or selling it or doing some sort of DA or something. And
But
so that would trigger taxing
Is it a city-owned property currently, though?
It is currently city-owned,
Okay.
but it's not the use that is specified in the long-range property management plan, because there's commercial properties.
So 100% of that evaluation is being passed on under, I'm just asking the question.
I mean, it depends actually we do other legal issues for that property that are not passed on to this whatsoever.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely, correct. And same with the east side property. So it has an enforceable obligation with a DDA, very complicated, maybe not for all of you, but for me, it's a complicated type of agreement. But it's the idea that we were going to be looking at that DDA, we're going to be looking at that property to look at these possibilities, and that's what we're estimating for the future for that time.
Well, so the DDA wouldn't refer to a DDA with the city, would it? It would refer to a third-party developer?
Well, so there's a developer already in place.
Okay. So, okay, again, I'm confused and I apologize. I'm easily confusable. And it's not the challenge, it's me
I understand.
So you have a property that's ROPS, that's owned by the city, that you're doing a DDA with for a third-party developer.
It was already a DDA when the ROPS, when RDA.
As an enforceable obligation.
Right, as an enforceable obligation.
So why would, I'm asking the question because you're the experts, not me. Why wouldn't that be under the properties, number of properties held to be disposed if it's under a DDA? Because my understanding was that I'm asking from a naivety point of view. My understanding was that city-owned property, government use, parks, those are off the books. They could be under ROPS. But the properties to be disposed were anything but developer properties.
Right. So I'd have to go back and look when we did this, but it is, just to be clear, it is city property. And it is, I can't have to go check to see how it's listed, but it does have an enforceable obligation with the DDA for the development that was there at the time. So that's why it gets the complication of if we again, it's about estimating time that we're going to spend if we are going to make the decision to say we're going to get rid of this and it's going to trigger other obligations that we have.
So, but the DDA costs, which I understand there are, are part of this budget, correct?
No, no, no.
They're not?
No,
Okay.
no, no.
I'm sorry, I tried to ask a bunch of questions, but we're all trying to absorb and understand.
I understand, and I
Every
certainly
city's a
want to
little
say.
different, by the way, so.
Right, and I appreciate the communication because it's interesting to hear your comments and from the various board members, and just to say how can we, and obviously as a group, communicate better to help you do your job as well.
Help us understand, too. We're learning.
Well,
as you
so,
can tell.
so I made the request if they could do the hourly breakdown, if that's something of interest or not. I mean, we asked one city to do it. If you mind helping us out and taking the time to do it, so we can better understand how your process works.
And then maybe if you can come back next time, whenever we see you, is explain, if you have, it sounds to me like this is a one-time bump. Am I mistaken there? I mean, I'm getting the feedback that this is like, you're going through an exercise. You may not know how long the exercise is going to take.
Right, so.
You're going through this wave, and obviously the
correct.
cost is going to go up, and then you're going to come back down to some plateau level, I'm assuming.
Right. So, and I appreciate your comment. I would say that, yes, for this particular time, it is certainly more than, we had to look at it very seriously and look at our staff time and say, yes, this is what we're going to be expending and we expect to expend. This is something that's happening right now. So, yes, I think it is a bump. It's hard to predict what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years because these are, politically and some of the agreements involved are very complicated to unwind if necessary to do that.
So I guess my first question is, I call it this the wave or whatever you want to call it. This
right. I just don't know how big the wave is. That's what I'm getting at. I think.
So how long, you're looking at a couple years. You're not talking months. You're looking at maybe 2 or 3 years.
Right.
For
So
this
what
to
I
get resolved to the
right.
issue that it will come back down to a plateau area?
Correct. And to be clear, I was looking at this next year because right now it is happening. And so I anticipate, looking at the time of these projects and trying to do my job to say, when am I expending my time and the city attorney's time? That's what this last one was about. For the future, of course, I'd have to say, is it still going on? Was a decision made that shutting it down or making a big substantial change that doesn't affect this or my time as much? That's what we would be looking at.
And what we're trying to do is design a timeline and a path that we can follow so we can monitor better with the understanding that we have fiduciary to the DOF to
Absolutely.
say, hey, these are funds that we agree that are reasonable and that should be allocated. And that's all we're trying to do.
Sure. And again, I think as Jamie mentioned, again, we're following our best practices. We are totally above board with how we do this. We took our time to make sure that we're going to give you hours that we think are appropriate. I wouldn't give the hours that we gave for the city attorney's office unless we actually sat down and thought about it and try to estimate our percentage of time. Again, it is based on that percentage of time for our office and for 2 attorneys specifically, but that's how we were looking at it. But we did take it very seriously and made an effort to ensure that we're giving you accurate information.
Thank you. Board, we're giving them 30 days. Maybe we should give them 60 days to come back. That's my first thought. What are your
Well,
thoughts?
are we going to have a meeting in November then, or?
We can have it whenever we decide to
Okay,
set one.
okay.
That's why I'm hearing Moore Park, and I'm hearing other, concerns, and I don't want to run too fast, but I also want to be.
No, I don't mind meeting in November. I'm just saying, right now, we don't have a meeting, but if you're willing to schedule one, that's okay.
Is there any other thoughts? And skip maybe October. Robert, do you have any thoughts on that?
Just the thing about, since we regularly schedule them on the fourth Wednesday of the month, in November, that runs up right around Thanksgiving, and in December, it runs up right around the holiday. So that's the only thing. And then, to have it on a different day, it's really hard because
Okay.
this.
Turkey and Christmas is first, board meeting second, so 30 days.
Well, can we do like the second week of November on the same day?
Well, that's the thing. It's just scheduling it here is very difficult because there are a lot of meetings that are held here.
Okay.
I mean, we could look at it and see if there's any parts, but I mean, at this point, I can't tell you what days are good.
Oh, down below. Let's stick with 30 days. I'll leave it to the board to decide, but I'll make a motion for the October meeting and to give all 9 entities an opportunity to resubmit based upon the tenor of this meeting And with the three specifics of, is it Fillmore, Moore Park, and Thousand Oaks, we'll be reporting back to this board? Is that an agreement?
So it's a Fillmore too?
No, I'm sorry, did I say Fillmore?
Yeah, it's just Thousand Oaks and Moore Park.
It's Thousand Oaks and Moore Park.
And then we have three more coming next month as well, do we not?
Yes, yes. And we haven't gone through all the cities yet.
We were going through the ones where the DOF letter was addressed.
Oh, okay.
We did. So we didn't address Oxnard, Simi, I know it's here, Port Hueneme, et cetera. But that was the first step.
Okay.
I'm open to any other board comments on this, though.
Do we want to go through the ones that were not, that were approved?
Not today.
But at the next meeting, I guess you're proposing that we'll get the remaining cities and then maybe have those other cities come back.
Yes.
In more
Yes.
detail.
Yes, so the motion is for the remaining cities, which are Oxnard, Port Hueneme, Santa Paula, and Simi, to return and report back. And for the two entities of Thousand Oaks and Moore Park, to provide some more detail on their admin reports, admin costs. Am I capturing all this? Please.
And I would encourage that we look at not the details of process, but the end finishing line. Look
Yeah.
for the finish line.
And just the narrative, I mean, this has been very helpful from what they've been explaining so far, so I think we can get there in October. Yes, sir.
No, just one thing that, just the other ones that haven't spoke, they're here. I mean, some have come kind of from far away.
You guys want to speak? Let's do it now then. Fine, let's do it. Simi's here. Come on up. Assistant City Manager.
Come on down.
You're acting City Manager, I'm sorry.
Interim city.
Interim?
Whatever. I'll answer it anything. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time. I got to give kudos to Ventura for explaining a lot of what happens behind the scenes in terms of processing the documentation and the financing and everything else that's related to the successor agencies. I will note, also keep in mind, you see the ROPS, and we go through that ROPS document. On October 1st, there is a document called the PPA that is due to the County of Ventura and the State of California. That's prior period accounting, where we have to account for an auditing of prior expenditure for the prior year. It's not a document that comes to the Oversight Board. Every agency has to do one of those. I know our agency, it probably takes us 6 to 8 hours to put that together. And we're fairly small ROPS documents. So some of these other agencies are going to have to put more time into it. So there is a lot of time. Every time someone touches the document or provides that information or gathers that information, that's a billable hour that kind of goes to this. We've taken a different approach, as you can probably see in our documents. And Mr. Powers will know, because I've said it before, we're in this business to get out of this business. I want to get out of this whole ROPS thing and the successor agency as quickly as I can. It's a money loser for us. Doesn't make any sense. I've asked our staff, what's the minimum amount of hours that you put into working on the successor agency issues? And we just concentrate on our fiscal side and our city administration side. So what we've done is our fiscal folks have told me we put a minimum of 40 hours into this. Great, that's all we're going to bill for. On a city administration side, we're putting in 30 hours, about approximately 30 hours. I mean, I'm here for 2.5 already. So you get that idea is we're underestimating. But now we actually, most of these agencies got letters in 2018. We got ours in 2017. So we're ahead of the curve. We got this a year ahead of everyone. We went through this exercise with the DOF. We went through this exercise when we had our own oversight board, and we reduced our costs down. We were like everyone else. We were putting down the minimum of $250,000. The money was coming in. It was great. And when DOF said, yeah, you need to give us some accounting. So we worked with the DOF. The accounting that we do is that we estimate, we provide for an hourly rate based upon the number of hours that are provided by our fiscal division. And then we do an hourly rate based upon the salaries of our administration side. And that's what we do. So it's a very simple calculation. You can see our numbers went down 1 year, and that was really because the overall salaries went down for that particular year. And like I said, we're in this business to get out of it, and so we're just looking to do whatever we need to do to get through the ROPS document and get through the details of that. When you do, and backing up my brother in here, whenever you submit a ROPS document, you immediately get an email from the state of California, give me all the backup. Okay, now you've got hours that our fiscal division is pulling that documentation to scan it in, to send them back up so they can analyze it. And there's back and forth, probably takes another 4 to 8 hours just back and forth for our agency with the state of California on justifying our ROPS numbers to them after we've already justified it to our accounting and justified it to you. So it's quite a process that goes on. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. Don't forget about the PPA document that does take a lot of accounting time that I think everyone needs to attribute to. But those are just requirements of the beast.
Real quick question. So since you account by hour, as you mentioned.
We do an hourly rate.
Yeah.
With a minimum number of hours.
And then you have, with a minimum number of hours.
Yes.
But you kind of balance it out if it requires more. I mean, I know for the ROPS you did a minimum number of hours. But when you do your DOF reports, you have the hours allocated, obviously, individually, correct? Or just a general minimum number of hours?
I know that over a year period, our fiscal division will spend at least 40 hours on working on everything that's successor agency related. I know over a year period, I'm going to spend in our city administration, not just me, about 30 hours of time dealing with the successor agencies, and we just put those numbers down.
Okay.
Any questions? I commend you, $51,000 budget. You guys have always been rather low on yours, so thank you, Mr. Gabler.
Absolutely, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Brian Gabler, Interim City Manager, City of Simi Valley.
I'd like to see if Port Huenemi's in. Oh, Santa Paula, please, you're next. My fault.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is Mark Persico. I'm the secretary to the Santa Paula DLA, designated local authority, and a consultant with Cosmont Companies. We don't have any properties left to sell. We sold the old theater building in January, and the only thing we have left is the 1994 bond payment. We hope to file a last and final ROPS in January. So as the last speaker said, we're also in the business to get out of this business, and we hope to be done very quickly. And I can answer any questions the board has.
I just have a fun question, maybe for our attorney, maybe, or if an agency files their last and final ROFs, but they're still making bond payments, and X number of years go by, and they can go out and refinance those bonds at a lower rate, what happens?
I think any financing has to be approved by the Department of Finance. When Pyru tried it, we were told no. Even though it would save money over the long haul, we were just told to keep making payments. Despite that, Pyru came forward and said, we don't even want an admin budget. We're just going to do those payments in the routine course of affairs.
But it wouldn't come back to here then, is my question.
It will if something is needed.
If something is needed.
And so you still are overseeing the county's Pyru RDA successor agency, but there's not anticipated that anything would come forward because there's no annual approval of budgets. We have a last and final ROPS already.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Would this board approve, Council, will this board approve the refinance as well, or is it only DOF?
No, it would have to be submitted by you for approval to DOF, but it's a staff level. They've told us don't bother.
It's good to know.
That might differ for a city, but that was the county's experience.
Okay. Is Port Hueneme present? Please.
Good morning. My name is Dee McGalkin. I'm an associate with RSG, and we're consulting for the Port Hueneme Successor Agency. We have our finance director here. I think there were a lot of good comments, good questions coming from the board, and good comments made from previous speakers, so I'll try to keep this brief. Couple things I would like to touch on, though. I'd like to provide a little bit more information about that prior period adjustment process that was described earlier. So that does involve submitting documentation on all actual expenditures to the county auditor controller, who reviews that documentation, and then the successor agency reports to the county on actual expenditures. The county then adds to their form, either confirming or adjusting the numbers that the successor agency has reported, and then submits that to the Department of Finance, who also reviews it. So I would say, to Mr. Powers' concern earlier, if the Department of Finance were to ask for an audit at some future time, they would be, in essence, admitting that they weren't reviewing it, actual expenditures before, when they were supposed to in the prior period adjustment process. So that process does cover all actual expenditures, and we have documentation behind all of our expenditures that we can provide, that we do provide. Another item I'd like to mention, I think this meeting is focused on the administrative budgets, which I understand the Department of Finance is asking the Oversight Board to exercise its fiduciary responsibility to the taxing entities and to review these administrative budgets. However, I think it's worth noting that there are other items that have a potential for greater savings and greater benefit for the taxing entities. So for example, a couple years ago, the Poor and Needy Successor Agency, we refunded our bonds, saving on average over $430,000 per year. And those savings are passed through to the taxing entities. So we are interested in reducing our obligations and winding down the affairs of the successor agency as we are tasked to do. And so we're doing it in every way that we can, including with that refunding. And prepared some other comments, but I think it was pretty well discussed earlier that regardless of how many items there are in the ROPS, or regardless of how many properties, each successor agency has to go through certain processes. So we submit our ROPS to the successor agency board, who's the city council, then we submit to the oversight board, and then to the Department of Finance. So that process, to some extent, is not directly correlating to the number of items. We still have to go through that process, attend those meetings, and that takes an amount of time. In addition to that, there's the PPA, again, reporting to the auditor controller, which also goes to the Department of Finance. One other item I'll say specific to Poor Renimi is that we've had some staff changes and also changes at City Council. So every time that happens, we have to update them. New staff has to get trained, and then there's changes in staff responsibilities on tasks and responsibilities related to the successor agency. And then we're available for the new city council, who again serves as the successor agency board, to bring them up to speed on what the successor agency is doing and why we're doing it. So I think those are the main comments, but we're happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Yeah, do you have a timeline for disposition of all your properties?
Sure, yeah. So based on the debt service schedule that the successor agency has, we'll have no more obligations after fiscal year 22-23. So we'll definitely dispose of the properties by then. And I don't want to spoil too much from the next meeting, where we'll be presenting more details on the properties, but we are trying to get that property sold.
I'm asking a question. Did I hear you correctly that when you submit the DOF, they're kind of already auditing your admin costs?
Yes, they request documentation, both when we are submitting the ROPS and requesting funding, and then also after we've reported how much is actually spent. The auditor controller, primarily, their request documentation on actual expenditures.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone left? Oxnard. Forgot. I'm going to ask Mr. Gabler to leave so he doesn't charge his admin budget anymore on this meeting, I'm afraid. Sorry. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Jason Williams. I'm management accountant with the city of Oxnard. The primary person that's actually involved with the accounting side of things. And so Adam asked me to come here anticipating that you might have any questions. So I'm glad to answer them. It seems like the majority of the questions are centered around the staffing and and the time spent. And so I'll just kind of go over that, the process that we go through. We have about 9 total staff between Finance Department and Economic Development that actually directly work with on the ROPS. And so those are the only ones that we're directly charging to the admin budget. There's an accountant. One is that deals with capital assets and the long-range property management plan. There's also another accountant that deals a lot with the actual admin costs, calculating as far as the weighted rate or the full rate as far as that's charged for each one of the staff. There's also I work on the specifically on the successor agency as well. I have another colleague that does bank reconciliations for the successor agency. And then, of course, the controller, she reviews these. All those are within finance. Within the economic development, that we have an admin secretary that does a lot the invoicing. There's also the community development director, which is the person that oversees process not only for economic development overall for the city, but also for the successor agency and the unwinding of the successor agency. Then we also have econ development manager that is involved with the development disposition of the downtown parcels, and then our project manager, which is Adam Smith, who's here today. So we actually, the economic development provides to us time, the actual time that is spent on the admin costs. There's also 4 other line items that are on the ROPS that are related to project management. And so they send us in, this is how much time we spent on just admin related costs to the successor agency. And then these are the time that is spent on the 4 project areas. So we receive those amounts, that time that's sent to us. What we also do is we take a total of the salaries plus the benefits divided by the total hours for the hourly associates that are worked on there, and 2,080 for those that are salaried, to get a proper rate that should be charged times that hour, times the hours that were worked, and that's how we arrive at the total for each one of them. Within finance department, the management accountant that does the bank recs, I talked with her. She spends approximately about an hour each month on the bank recs, so it's minimal. So she gets about 12 hours. The controller spends about half an hour reviewing it, and so it's only like 3 hours. For me and my other colleagues that actually work within finance, we basically we just take the time that we know that, okay, we worked on, we had these meetings, we worked on these aspects of the ROPS and these aspects related to as far as auditing, as far as getting everything ready for the fiscal year end audit, as well as the PPA, and then any final submissions of ROPS and what have you. That's kind of how we do our time. So it's really about, we don't have any allocation as far as time, any percentage allocations. It's really mostly direct hours that are actually spent on the successor agency.
So you have a labor costing system, and you're actually charging your hours to this?
Yes. So it's, we don't really have, currently we don't have any type of allocation of our time. It's just basically direct hours.
Got it.
Yeah, so that's related to the staffing. And so I don't know if there's any other questions you have related to any other item on our admin budget.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Welcome. Thank you.
So, anything else, Robert? Anybody we should do it I haven't done yet? Extend this meeting longer? Thank you all. It's a good discussion. We have a lot. We're getting there. It's really good. This is very informative. And at every meeting, I learn more. We all learn more. I guess on this item, I'll make the motion and make sure we're clear about our expectations are for a month. Will be for report back from Ward Park and Thousand Oaks on the admin costs, and a report on the remaining properties, which are going to be Port Hueneme, Ventura, and Simi Valley. Those are the 3 ones up there.
Well, Oxnard's going to come.
Oxnard just did.
Well, yeah, we also talked about the a path and timing, and we really want to get before our next meeting, a quick summary of path and timing, I think, from all the cities.
Well, he's also talking to that one person, so we should get an update from
He said
Oxnard.
6 months, right?
Yeah, so that's 6 months, that's
Yeah, we're
right.
talking about next
Oh, you're talking about 6, okay.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, well, eventually we want to get to a path.
Yeah.
We have one or two that are going to close up next year, and then a couple years down the
Right.
line. So maybe not for the ROPS, but certainly if they're preparing at that point in time, we'll know between now and January. But like I said, next year, maybe we can concentrate on the paths as well.
Yeah. Any other comments?
Please, a question.
I just want to confirm Oxnard in 6 months' time on our, okay.
Yes, please. Thank you. And we need a vote to receive and file. Need a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Powers agrees.
I'll second then.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate this meeting. It's been very helpful. The meeting is adjourned.